On Sundays, we've been looking at this series of bold claims that people have made leading up to the crucifixion of Jesus. And today we're going to look at one of probably the boldest claims that we've seen so far. And it comes from the most unlikely of sources that you would expect to make this kind of claim. We don't even know this man's name, but just I want to portray it for you a little bit differently today. So I'm going to give him the name. I picked out a good Roman name, Vitellius, and I'm going to call this guy Vitellius. And let me lead up to his bold claim by telling you the story as though I were Vitellius. All my life, I wanted to be a Roman soldier. They were the best army. They were the most feared army. Nobody stood in their way. And so from the earliest of ages, I trained, I learned, I grew stronger. I wanted to be a part of the Roman army. And I was. I got to be a part of that army. And while I was there, I continued to train and to learn and to take on every challenge that I could take. And I began to get advanced. I got recognized by my superior officers, and I was given more opportunities and more opportunities. And eventually, I earned the rank of centurion. It's a rare place. Not many people can earn that rank, and I truly earned it. I put my life, my blood on the line. And I don't say this to brag, because other people will say it as well. We centurions, we're the backbone of the Roman army. We're the cement that holds the army together. When we give commands, when we lead by our life, people follow our steps. I've had the opportunity to go all over the world. I've been alongside soldiers as they've died for the cause of Rome. I've seen our enemies die. I've been around death and conquest my entire life. A while ago, I got a new assignment. I wasn't sure if I'd really like it because I got moved to an area that wasn't really that much of a conflict. It's this occupied area of Israel, specifically in this region of Judea. I was in charge of all of the soldiers in the Antonia fortress. I was the personal bodyguard for the Roman governor there, Pontius Pilate. And for the most part, things were pretty easy for us. We had a problem with one guy. He kind of waged a guerrilla warfare against Rome. He attacked our troops. He would snipe at us. He would attack us in secret ways. We eventually caught him. He was tried, and Governor Pilate found enough evidence against this guy named Barabbas that he was convicted of murder, he was convicted of insurrection, and he was waiting on death row for his day of execution. Other than that, things were pretty easy. And then last week, the Jewish Sanhedrin brings into us a guy that they were claiming acted a lot like Barabbas, that he was trying to undermine Rome, that he was telling people to follow him and not follow Caesar, to not follow the Roman rules. And I thought, well, how could that be if I haven't even heard of him before? And Governor Pilate felt the same way. He listened to those complaints. He weighed all the evidence, and he said, no, I don't find any charges here. You guys deal with him yourself. It appears to be just a religious dispute. But they were insistent. They said, no, you have to pass sentence on this man. Governor Pilate tried several times to just have this guy Jesus released, and it just never happened. The crowd was so insistent. So finally, Governor Pilate pulled me aside and said, I think that if we have Jesus flogged, that maybe that'll be enough. Maybe that will appease them. I really don't see any reason why we need to crucify him like they're asking, but let's have him flogged, and maybe that will take care of it. So I gathered together the whole company of soldiers, and we took Jesus in for this flagellation. I've seen it before. I've seen victims as they approach the praetorium where we are. I've seen them blubbering. I've heard them bargaining for their lives. I've heard them shouting curses at us. I've seen all of that hundreds of times. But I didn't see it with this man, Jesus. He didn't make a sound. Didn't curse us. didn't bargain for his life. A lot of our victims never survived flagellation. They'll die right there, but he survived through this. And even later on, as I was getting ready to take him back to Pilate, some of my soldiers got out of hand, and they acted very unsoldier-like, very unbecoming for Roman soldiers. And they put this robe on Jesus, and they put crowns of thorns on his head and pushed it in there, and just were making fun of him. And still, this man made not a sound. He just stood there. I took him back to Pilate. Pilate said to the Jewish leaders, here you go. We've taken care of him. We've punished him. We've literally thrashed him to within an inch of his life. Now I'm just going to let him go. And they would not stop. And you know, Governor Pilate's got this policy that every year at the Jewish Passover, he lets somebody go. Do you know that they wanted Barabbas? That this guy who caused all this problem, who had murdered, who truly had tried to undermine Rome, that's who they wanted. And they were insistent that this guy Jesus be crucified. Finally, Governor Pilate said to me, you know, I don't see any way out of this. If I let Jesus go, I think that you and your men are going to have a big problem to deal with. But if we give in, if we crucify him, I think that that's going to allow things to die down. Jesus, Governor Pilate told him that Jesus said, I don't have followers that are going to fight you. That's my kingdom isn't here. They're not going to fight for this. So let's just do this. And so I pulled together my 4-man crucifixion squad. We took Jesus and 2 other thieves, and we began the journey to head out to this place called Golgotha, the place of the skull. Literally, there's bones all over the ground from our crucifixion victims. We've done this so many times. Well, it was clear before we got too far into our journey that Jesus wasn't going to be able to make it. He was so weakened from the flagellation he went through. There was a big guy standing right there in the front watching, and I pulled out my sword, and I laid the flat of my sword right on his shoulder. He knew what that meant. He had to obey what I was calling him to do, and so he stepped forward, and I ordered him to pick up that crossbeam and carry it for Jesus. We get up to the top of the hill. These 2 guys that are thieves are yelling at us. They're cursing us. They're cursing Jesus. They're trying to bargain for their lives. As my soldiers were getting them ready for crucifixion, it's my job to take the charges and nail them to the cross. We want everybody to know why they're there. And so the first guy, I nailed it up there, and I said, it says thief. And we put him on the cross, and he cursed us, and we hoisted him up in the air and dropped his cross on the ground. The second guy, I nailed his charge up, thief, and we nailed him to the cross, and we lifted him up in the air. And then I looked at what Governor Pilate wrote for Jesus. It said, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. I'd never seen anything like that before. And again, I'd never seen anything like this man before either. I nailed the charge to the cross. And then we laid him down. And unlike the other guys, and unlike every other crucifixion victim I've ever seen, he didn't fight us. He willingly just laid his arm out for us to drive the spike through his wrist. And he laid out his other arm. He put his legs and crossed his ankles as we drove. He never fought us at any step of the way. And unlike these other guys that are just throwing curses at us, as we lifted Jesus up in the air and dropped his cross into the ground, I heard him murmuring something, and I tuned in a little bit more to see what is he saying. He's probably finally cursing us for all of this. And then I listened and realized he was praying. And he wasn't praying for himself that he could somehow get out of this. He, through his swollen eyes, he looked at these people that had so maligned him and cursed him and wanted his crucifixion. Even looked at me, and he prayed for me. And he said, Father, forgive them. They don't even know what they're doing. I'd never had anybody pray for me before. Curse me, yes. Pray for me? No. You know, got the attention of one of the other thieves too. He stopped his cursing, turned and looked at Jesus, and he called him Lord. He said, Lord, when you enter into your paradise, will you remember me? And Jesus said, yes, today you're going to be right there with me in paradise. As a Roman soldier, we know paradise. It's Elysium, we call it. It's where soldiers go when you've lived a good life and died an honorable death. And he's giving that to a man who's been a thief his whole life and just moments ago was even cursing Jesus. And now Jesus said, you can go with me into heaven. I had time to ponder this because I knew when we crucify people, they don't die quickly. It takes them a long time to die. My soldiers were over here gambling for Jesus' clothes, passing the time, and now I had time to just mull this over. I was thinking about it, and I listened to the way Jesus cared for his mother as he talked to her, as he continued to pray to his Father. And then one of my soldiers came up. He's carrying a message from Governor Pilate. These religious leaders, they weren't satisfied yet. They said, hey, we've got a Passover to prepare for, our religious celebration. We can't have dead bodies hanging up here. Is there any way to move this along? Is there any way to get this done? Well, we knew how to do that. These guys would push down on their feet. That's how they could get air before they slumped down again. And so we just break their legs and they can't push up anymore. So I gave the order to my soldiers. As they're getting their instruments ready to do this, Jesus speaks out again, and I hear him with a loud voice. He says, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And then he says this one word, tetelestai. It is finished. I know what that means. As a soldier, we would say tetelestai when we won the victory, when we completely vanquished the enemy. What enemy did he just defeat? My soldiers went over to the first thief and they broke his legs, and real quickly he just suffocated and died. They went to the other thief. But as they headed toward Jesus, I noticed he wasn't moving. There was none of that spontaneous, involuntary pushing down on his legs to get air in his lungs. He just wasn't moving anymore. I stopped my soldier. I said, I think he's dead already. Let's just make sure. My soldier pulled out a spear, jammed it in his side. We saw the telltale signs of water, blood that came out of his side. We knew that he was dead. Just as that happened, I had a quaking in my heart. I realized it wasn't just my heart that was quaking, it was the whole ground that was quaking. I don't know which was shaking harder, the ground or my heart. I've never seen a man like this before. I've been around death. I've been around dying. I've been around honorable people. I've never seen anybody die like this man. And before I even realized what I was doing, I had dropped to my knees. Then I was praising the same God that Jesus had been praying to. And out of my mouth came the words, certainly, this was a righteous man. It's a bold statement for a Roman centurion to make. To look at somebody that he thinks he is crucifying for a crime, that he's carrying out a capital punishment for a crime, and in one statement to say he didn't deserve the punishment that he received. To recognize that he just won a victory that the centurion didn't even fully understand what victory he had won. See, the principle is this. A lot of people will call Jesus mistakenly a martyr. And they'll say, oh, look what happened to Jesus. He was martyred. Calvary took place, took him by surprise. No, Calvary didn't happen to Jesus. Jesus came on purpose to make Calvary happen. He fulfilled every step along the way so that this would happen, so that he could say, it is finished, the price has been fully paid. And just like the thief that was hanging on the cross next to him that said, you are the Lord and you do have the authority to welcome me into your presence forever. Just like Vitellius, the centurion that dropped to his knees and said, surely you are a righteous man. It's the same statement that's been made 2,000 years later. People like me, like you, that meet Jesus and say there's something different about him. But Jesus knew that. Jesus said that when I am lifted up, I'm going to draw everyone to me. A thief, a centurion, people throughout the ages are going to be drawn when they see this Savior lifted up, because he came to make Calvary happen. Earlier on, 700 years earlier, Isaiah is giving a prophecy about Jesus, and even in this prophecy, you hear him saying things like, we don't understand this. This doesn't seem like it should happen this way. He said he had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him. Nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men. He was a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. Like one from whom men hide their faces. They don't even want to look at that. He was despised and we esteemed him not. But surely he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrows. Even then, Isaiah says, yet we considered him stricken by God, smitten by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. I doubt that thief on the cross or the centurion knew these prophecies, but after meeting Jesus, they would be able to personalize this and say, he took up my infirmity. He carried my sorrow. It was my transgressions that put him there. It was my iniquities that crushed him. It was my punishment that he took so that I could have peace. That's what we celebrate. That's what we remember. When Jesus was with his disciples just moments before he's going to go to the Garden of Gethsemane and pray and be arrested, he had what we now refer to as the Last Supper. It's really the first remembrance of him being lifted up. He says, as Luke writes, that Jesus took bread and gave thanks and broke it. And Jesus said, this is going to tell you what's coming. This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. In the same way, after supper, Jesus took the cup, saying, this cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you. He allowed his body to be broken and his blood to be spilled. He was lifted up so that we could be drawn to him and say, there's something about this man. Surely this was a righteous man. I want us to take a moment and take these elements of communion, this broken bread and this cup, that we can remember again. Jesus said, as often as we do this, we do it to remember and to celebrate what took place on the cross. Jesus, it was my sin. It was my transgressions, my iniquity. But you became my sin. You were the righteous one, the all-righteous one, the perfect one. You were the only one that could take my sin and take it to the cross and make atonement for it. And so, Lord, when we partake of the broken bread, we remember your broken body. It was not broken because of anything you had done, but broken in our place to atone for our sin. We remember that and we celebrate that today. We partake of this bread together. In the same way, Jesus, your blood was spilled. You became the once for all sacrifice the last sacrifice that would ever be needed. And when we partake of this cup, we remember that you willingly allowed your blood to be poured out so that we could step into this relationship with you forever and forever. Thank you for what you did for us. We partake of this cup together. I think the other thing that is important for us to remember as we celebrate Good Friday is not only thankful for what Jesus did for us, but also thoughtful of how we should live. One of the things that I think caught that Roman centurion's attention was the fact that Jesus wasn't bargaining and fighting for this life, for this temporary thing that he could have right here, but that he was looking for something bigger and farther than that. And so Jesus calls us to the same thing. He says, if you're going to follow me, you have to give up. Take your hands off of trying to do this. Look at what he says here. He says, when you're going to follow me, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life here will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. When we strive for this life, this is all we get. But when we keep our eyes and our focus on him and give up this life, we get more than we could ever imagine. The Roman centurion would have also been very familiar with this language that Paul uses. And I think it describes the way that our lives that are focused on the crucified Savior and living for him. Paul wrote this in 2 Corinthians, but thanks be to God who always leads us in triumphal procession in Christ. When we take up our cross, we're walking in a triumph as we follow Jesus. And he says, and then through us spreads everywhere the fragrance of the knowledge of him. For we are to God the aroma of Christ among those who are being saved and those who are perishing. When we live focused on Jesus and living for him, our lives become the fragrance of Jesus. People say there's something different. They might say something very similar to what this Roman centurion said about Jesus. There's a righteous man. There's a righteous woman. They respond in ways that I don't expect people to respond. I've been around people that are in trials and tribulations and have even been persecuted. I know how they're supposed to respond, and that one responds differently. Why? Because they've left their life here. They've taken up their cross and followed the one who was crucified and lives forever. And now when we follow him, there's that same fragrance of our life that will cause people to go, there's something different. There's something different about you.